David had always believed that actions spoke louder than words. He never felt the need to broadcast his achievements to the world, and this philosophy extended to his marriage with Anna. To her, he was simply David, a man with a modest salary, living a quiet, unassuming life. She never asked him for details about his work, and he never offered much. In his mind, the less she knew, the less she could use against him if things ever went wrong. What Anna didn't know was that David was the CEO of a mid-sized company, a role he had earned through years of relentless effort, self-discipline, and countless sleepless nights. But David wasn't one to flaunt his title or his accomplishments. He believed his job defined him, not the prestige that came with it. When they married, he didn't hide his career, but he didn't make it the focal point of their relationship either. He wanted Anna to love him for who he was, not for his status or wealth. His dream was to build a partnership based on mutual respect and emotional connection, not material success. For a while, it seemed to work. Anna didn't ask many questions, and David didn't offer much. But over time, he began to notice subtle changes in her behavior. Her priorities shifted, and the way she treated him changed. She began to see him as someone she could rely on when it was convenient, but dismiss when he wasn't needed. Because of his quiet demeanor, she assumed he was lazy and unambitious. She had no idea how many hours he spent building the company that provided for every one of her needs and desires. At first, David didn't mind her misconceptions. He told himself that everyone was entitled to their opinions. But over time, her dismissive tone grew sharper, and her words cut deeper. What started as small criticisms slowly snowballed into full-blown disdain. She never asked about his work, never acknowledged the sleepless nights, the endless meetings, or the immense pressure of running a business. Instead, she would often compare her contributions to his, as if he were nothing more than a lazy bystander in their marriage. David wanted to share the realities of his life with her, but something held him back. Maybe it was pride, or perhaps a subconscious desire to see if she could accept him for who he truly was, without the glitz and glamour of his title. Spoiler alert, she didn't. Instead, he played the role of the calm, unassuming spouse. He didn't argue or disagree, not because he was afraid to speak up, but because he didn't see the point. He reminded himself that actions always spoke louder than words. But now, he wondered if he had made a mistake. Should he have corrected her assumptions sooner? Would her behavior have changed if she had known the truth about his career, or would it have made things worse? He had allowed her to create a flawed image of him, her foolish husband, as she liked to call him. Little did she know, the man she dismissed so easily was pulling strings she couldn't even begin to comprehend. One day, she would learn just how wrong she had been, but by then, it would be too late. David's breaking point came when Anna's behavior became increasingly disruptive. She began showing up at his workplace, his favorite coffee shop, and even the park he frequented during lunch breaks, trying to get his attention. One afternoon, his assistant Sarah informed him that Anna was in the building lobby, agitated and demanding to see him. David sighed, rubbing his temples. "What is she doing this time?" he asked. Sarah hesitated before replying. "She says it's urgent." David leaned back in his chair, considering his options. Tell her. David had a clear belief. Action spoke louder than words. He had never felt the need to showcase his successes to anyone, and this philosophy extended to his relationship with Anna. To her, he was just David, a man with a simple job and an unpretentious lifestyle. She never probed into the specifics of his work, and he never volunteered much information. In his mind, the less she knew, the less she could hold over him if things ever took a turn for the worse. What Anna didn't know was that David was the CEO of a mid-sized company, an achievement that had taken years of tireless work, personal sacrifices, and countless sleepless nights. But David wasn't one to flaunt his position. To him, his work defined him, not the recognition that came with it. When they married, he didn't conceal his job, but he didn't make it the centerpiece of their relationship either. He wanted Anna to love him for who he was, not for his title or wealth. His ideal was a partnership rooted in respect and emotional connection, not material success. For a while, This approach seemed to work. Anna didn't ask many questions, and David didn't offer much. But over time, he started noticing subtle changes in her behavior. Her priorities shifted, and her treatment of him changed. She began seeing him as someone she could depend on when it suited her, yet dismiss when he wasn't of use. Because of his quiet nature, she mistakenly assumed he was lazy and lacked ambition. She had no idea how many hours he dedicated to building the company that supported her every need. At first, David shrugged off her misconceptions. He told himself that everyone was entitled to their opinions. But over time, her dismissive attitude grew sharper, and her words became cutting. What began as small criticisms gradually turned into open disdain. She never asked about his work or acknowledged the sacrifices he made. Instead, she frequently compared her contributions to his, treating him as if he were a passive observer in their marriage. David wanted to share the truth with her, but something held him back. Maybe it was pride, or perhaps a hidden desire to see if she could love him for who he truly was, without the glittering allure of his title. Unfortunately, she didn't. Instead, he played the role of the calm, nonchalant husband. He didn't argue or push back, not because he feared confrontation, but because he didn't see the point. He convinced himself that action spoke louder than words. Yet, now he wondered if he had made a mistake. Should he have corrected her perception sooner? Would things have been different if she had known the truth about his career, or would it have made matters worse? He had allowed her to create an inaccurate image of him, her foolish husband, as she often put it. Little did she know, the man she dismissed so easily was orchestrating things she couldn't even begin to understand. One day, she would realize how wrong she had been, but by then, it would be too late. David reached his breaking point when Anna's behavior became increasingly disruptive. She began showing up at his office, his regular coffee spot, and even the park where he liked to take his lunch breaks, all in an attempt to get his attention. One afternoon, his assistant, Sarah, informed him that Anna had arrived at the building lobby, visibly upset and demanding to see him. David sighed, rubbing his forehead. "What is she doing this time?" he asked. Sarah paused before answering. "She says it's urgent." David leaned back in his chair, contemplating his response. "Tell her, I'm busy. If she needs a conversation, she can send an email." When David returned from his meeting, Sarah informed him that Anna had left, though not before making a scene in the lobby. She had reportedly yelled at the receptionist, accusing her of hiding David and threatening to escalate the situation. Though his colleagues were tactful enough to avoid mentioning it directly, David could feel the tension hanging in the air. Anna's actions weren't just embarrassing. They were disruptive and unprofessional. Later that evening, David reviewed a text message from Anna. One line stood out. "I'm scared, David. Please come back, even if it's just for a little while. I don't know what I'll do without you." For a brief moment, he felt a pang of pity. They had been married for years, and it was hard to forget the good times, despite the toxicity that had built up. But then, he remembered the countless times she had belittled him, dismissed him, and made him feel insignificant. He couldn't go back, not now, not ever. The next morning, David's lawyer called to let him know that the divorce papers had been filed and that Anna would be served within the week. "Good," David replied. "Let me know if she contests it." Things could get complicated. His lawyer cautioned him to prepare for a challenging process, but David was resolute. He had invested years of his life into the marriage, but Anna had thrown away all his patience and understanding. It was time to move on. Later that day, Anna showed up at his apartment unannounced. There was loud, persistent knocking, followed by her voice calling, "David, please open the door. I just want to talk." David sat in silence on the couch, staring at the door. "David, I know you're in there. Your car's outside," she yelled. He didn't budge. After a while, the knocking ceased, and he heard her footsteps retreat. He peered through the peephole and saw her sitting on the stairs with her head in her hands. The guilt threatened to surface, but he pushed it aside. He wasn't ignoring her out of cruelty. He was protecting himself. That evening, David poured himself a glass of wine, locked the door, and turned off his phone. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Anna could panic all she wanted, but he refused to let her ensnare him again. This was his life, free, independent, and finally under his control. When Anna received the divorce papers, her reaction was as expected. The calls began almost immediately. At first, she was furious. "You're humiliating me," she screamed, "hiding behind lawyers instead of facing me like a man." David ignored every message, but after a few days, her tone changed. The anger was replaced by desperation. "David, please, let's fix this. I'll change. Don't throw everything away. Tell me you love me, and we'll make it work." But David wasn't fooled. She wasn't apologizing out of love. She was apologizing because she had lost the control she thought she had over him. One evening, she managed to catch him before he could hang up. Her voice trembled, a mix of anguish and anger. "David, how could you do this to me? After everything? Are you really going through with the divorce?" David took a deep breath, then replied calmly, "This didn't happen overnight, Anna. It's been a long time coming. The moment you decided I wasn't worthy of respect, this became inevitable." She tried to protest. Every marriage has its tough times. "You don't just give up when things get hard." David interrupted her. "This isn't about tough times. This is about how you've treated me for years. You've belittled me, lied to me, and made me feel invisible in my own marriage. I'm done." There was a long silence on the other end before she spoke, her tone softer. "David, I didn't mean those things. I was just frustrated." David replied firmly, "The problem is, Anna, you did mean them. That's who you are. And this conversation is over." He hung up before she could respond. It was heartbreaking, but David stood by his decision. For the first time in years, he was prioritizing his own well-being. As painful as it was, he felt a profound sense of relief. In the weeks that followed, Anna's messages grew fewer. It seemed she was starting to accept the reality of the situation. When the divorce was finalized, David knew he had made the right choice. He was free,